Supply chain disruptions have become a significant challenge for the U.S. FDA-regulated products industry, affecting the availability of pharmaceuticals, medical devices, and food. These disruptions are caused by various factors, including U.S. policy shifts, geopolitical tensions, natural disasters, and pandemics. The future of global supply chains remains uncertain, but ongoing industry efforts aim to enhance resilience and ensure the continuous supply of critical products. In this episode, we dive into how the FDA-regulated products industry is responding to these disruptions. I'm Leanne Lee, and you're listening to Baker Hosts. On today's episode, Winston Curtin, co-leader of Baker Hostetler's FDA practice and co-leader of the life sciences industry team, will be speaking with Mara Burr, Principal, Nordic Global Strategies. Let's listen in.
Hello, friends. This is Winston Curtin, and today it is my absolute pleasure to welcome my friend Mara Burr to the podcast. Mara currently serves as principal at Nordic Global Strategies and an adjunct professor at Georgetown University Law Center. She is a distinguished professional and executive whose career spans almost 3 decades, combining vast expertise in global, federal, and state issues with an unparalleled depth of knowledge in legal, regulatory, and international trade matters. Her multifaceted experience makes her a powerful negotiator and advocate whose contributions have significantly impacted global public policy and international relations. Mara's career reflects a commitment to addressing complex challenges, like what we're going to discuss today, supply chain disruptions, that touch upon critical areas such as global public health, nutrition, labeling, and competitiveness issues. Mara previously served as Vice President, Regulatory and Technical Affairs at Consumer Brands Association, Director, Multilateral Relations Office of the Secretary of Health and Human Services, International Policy, U.S. FDA, Food Safety and Applied Nutrition, Special International Legal Advisor, U.S. Agency for International Development, focusing on Vietnam, Deputy Assistant United States Trade Representative, Executive Office of the President. Hello, Mara. We are delighted to have you today. How are you doing?
I'm doing well, Winston. Thank you. And it's really nice to be here with you today.
Wonderful. No, we appreciate you coming on board. Last month, our podcast guest was Mark Abdu, the Associate Commissioner for Global Policy and Strategy, Office of the Commissioner, US FDA. Mark was generous and gracious with his time to share insights on how U.S. government policy shifts may be impacting the global supply chain for FDA-regulated products. So we discussed on that podcast policy shifts, including tariffs, especially as relates to China, onshoring, trade relations, FDA reorganization changes, among other changes at FDA, reimportation, export controls, and investigations such as Section 232. So today, I would like to focus our discussion on the FDA-regulated product industry response to the ongoing supply chain disruptions across not just pharma, but medical devices and foods. So let's get right into it, Mara. What, in your opinion, are the primary factors currently causing global disruptions in the supply chain for FDA-regulated products?
Sure, Winston. I think certainly the issues with the newly announced tariffs and the tariff issues are certainly impacting the supply chain. Many of the supply chains across the products that you talked about in the FDA-regulated space are global in nature. And so, especially on the food side, you may have inputs from numerous countries that are going into finished products that are produced here in the United States. So if you're looking at a spreadsheet of your suppliers, potentially global suppliers, the tariff rates may jump between April and June, or you may be facing higher tariffs on products that you know are going to come online in the next couple of months. So that creates uncertainty because that impacts the price of the overall manufactured product. And also, it could impact the availability of products. We have other things that are definitely we need to look at. One is just the nature of global hazards and weather events, the ongoing conflicts in Ukraine. Ukraine is a major producer of food products, but you also have places like India and China and other places that may be facing tariffs, may be in the midst of negotiation, but all contribute to that global supply chain. And any uncertainty in one place causes uncertainty in other places. So I think those are some of the primary drivers, and really the political instability that we're seeing in many countries right now. It's just hard to know for supply chain professionals where they should source their products from, what it's going to cost. And normally these are longer term decisions. Now these have to be revisited on a much more frequent basis. And I think that's causing some of the instability that you're seeing and some of the real concern about the stability and sustainability of supply chains.
Yeah, that's my experience dealing with clients. You and I were on a previous event, and we talked about perhaps being in a VUCA environment, borrowing from the military term volatility, uncertainty, complexity, and ambiguity. And you said maybe we should call it UCA, right? Uncertainty, complexity, and ambiguity. And most of my clients, right, are looking for a level of certainty, if you will. Now, recently, with the passing of the big beautiful bill, there seems to be incentives really focused and targeted towards onshoring. And I want to ask you and have you opine on, can onshoring solve some of these riddles, especially as you indicated that eh, we're really in a global supply chain, right? We're not in a domestic supply chain. So, what are your thoughts about onshoring and whether or not that presents any type of remedies or strategies that could be included in clients' overall approach?
Sure. That's a great question, Winston. I think I look back to the days of the General Agreement on Tariffs and Trade before it became the World Trade Organization. And there used to be a maxim that whoever builds the best mousetrap wins. And the idea behind that saying was if you build the best product at the best price, you can be relied upon. You shouldn't have any other issues that you have to deal with. But in the global space, there are many issues you have to deal with. There are regulatory requirements, there are customs issues, there are transportation costs, the whole supply chain piece of it. So just because you make the best mousetrap doesn't mean you're going to do the best in the market because you might have several other factors that you have to face in getting your product from wherever you're producing it to where it needs to go. And that may be a long journey, it may be a short journey. It may include many regulatory entities, it may only include a few, but nevertheless, however many steps are on that chain are going to cause potentials for delay, potentials for additional costs, problems in the supply chain. So there is a sense that if you onshore products, you bring some of the manufacturing back to the United States and you build the necessary incentives for workers to undertake those types of jobs, that you're building security in the supply chain. And I think that's a laudable goal. Sure, we would love to be more in control of our supply chains. That would bring greater stability to many of the supply chains. And if you're dealing with someone from Akron, Ohio, or somewhere else, and you can pick up the phone and call them, you understand each other, that's great. Is it a little bit more challenging if your supply chain includes Chinese producers or Indian producers or things like that? Sure. But you may not have a choice because the inputs that you need may only come from certain countries. For example, we've talked about in the food space, but the United States really doesn't grow coffee or cacao. And so for coffee lovers and chocolate lovers, we have to rely on supply chains outside the United States. So I think onshoring can be a great tool, potentially in certain industries and certain areas. But we also have to make sure that we have the workers, that they're well trained, that there are educational programs, and that there's a market for those workers and that the supply chain works economically. You can't just onshore products without working out the economics, working out all of the different aspects of where they'll be located, what are the local laws, what are the state requirements. There are many things that you have to think about when you onshore, and getting the right amount of workers with the right skills is not a magical thing. You really have to work at it. Our economy in the United States has changed a lot, and I think we have to understand those changes, and we have to go back to the drawing board if we want to onshore products, we want to manufacture more products in the United States. And there's certain steps that we need to do. There's planning that needs to underpin that to make sure that we do it in a way that's not disruptive or undermines the markets. So that would be my thought on onshoring.
Yeah, you mentioned security, right? Even if that's an ideal in terms of bringing manufacturing in all of these sectors back, does it negate or does it create opportunities for safety related issues as that can be seen as a level of disruption? No?
I think any potential threat to the supply chain is a potential disruption to the supply chain. You need to make sure that whatever your supply chain looks like, you have the right people in the right places with the right training doing what they're supposed to. Any supply chain can break down due to numerous things. You can have bad weather, you can have monsoons, you can have tornadoes, you can have floods. We've seen that just in the last month. We've seen the political disruption. So we onshore, potentially, for an example, we onshore production facilities in Texas. We just saw massive flooding in Texas. What if your onshore facility is wiped out by flooding? Yes, you have workers in the United States. Yes, you have perhaps a stronger supply chain because you're manufacturing products here. But that doesn't mean necessarily you have no risk. There's always risk. I think as Americans, we always think that we make the best products. We have the best ideas. We lead the way on so many issues. And actually, I think that's true. I think we have a lot to be proud of in the United States about what we bring to the table. But we shouldn't think that just because we're able to onshore everything means that we've eliminated risks or safety issues. And that's where the training comes in. That's where potentially auditing comes in. When you audit supply chains, you got to make sure that whatever suppliers you're choosing are right for the job, they're fit for purpose, and there's no bad history in those facilities, in those production facilities, manufacturing facilities. So you need to do a lot of due diligence. And I guess maybe that's what I've taken a while to say, but you really need to plan, you need due diligence, you need to know what you're getting into, and you can't eliminate 100% of the risk. You can mitigate, but you can't eliminate. And I think that's something that we just have to get used to in a more volatile world.
Yeah, no, I agree. There is a tendency to focus this disruption conversation just on like pharmaceuticals and then maybe secondarily devices. One of the reasons I think you are such a significant thought leader and expertise is because you look across sectors, right? And one sector I don't know is getting a lot of traction is the food sector, right?
Right.
Foods are not pre-market approved by FDA, maybe yet, right?
Mhm.
We see action coming out of HHS to take dyes out of foods and even drugs, right?
Yep.
And my question though is around whether or not, let's just say we piggyback the onshoring conversation, whether or not we can onshore our food supply. Like I'm a big fan of Fiji water, right? I could switch, but give us a couple of thoughts, if you will, on just foods, where you see foods in this whole supply chain mix.
Yeah, no, absolutely, Winston. You're absolutely right. I think there's a number of things you have to consider when you think about food. One is absolutely positively safety has to be the number one concern. So is the food safe? And so for fresh foods, and there's a big push between from HHS and FDA, fresh foods, they don't want processed foods. So they want more fresh fruits, produce, things like that in
Make America healthy again.
make America healthy again. So yeah, healthy foods in the market. A food can be healthy and dangerous. And so my point is leafy greens make a lot of people sick because they bring pathogens into the human body. If your agricultural process is not absolutely spot on and your food gets infected with agricultural runoff, gets infected with other things, you can, if the precautions are not taken, you can have food that is unhealthy. It's a healthy food in theory, but if you eat that spinach, if you eat that romaine, if you eat that tomato, you could get very sick because we're taking a healthy food and we're saying it's safe. We don't know that it's safe. Generally, yes, a particular type of food might be normally healthy and good for you, but not if it's contaminated. And then you need to, so it has to be safe and good for you. And then consumers want choice, right? Consumers, you want to go into that water aisle in the supermarket and you want to pick out the water that you want because you like it. So we got to make sure that consumers have sufficient choice that they can make their own determinations in the supermarket. And then, and I bet this is a consideration too, you don't want to pay too much. You'd like to pay as little as possible for that.
Economics matter. Economics matter.
Economics matter. So if you're a producer of food products, here's the challenge that you face. It needs to be safe. There's a growing trend that you want to be healthy. You also need to make sure that you can trace those products, where they came from, when they were harvested, how they were harvested. So if there's any sort of problem, you can work with the Food and Drug Administration, Department of Agriculture, whomever is your regulatory authority to make sure if there's any problem, it's notified right away. And then you may have legal consequences, right? If you haven't taken the necessary precautions to keep your product safe. Now, the United States does a lot of things really well, but we can't grow all of the food that our population needs. We can't grow as many, let's say, oats or wheat or corn or all those things that we need to make both fresh foods and processed foods. And we need processed food because you need shelf stable foods. Lower income folks need shelf stable foods. They may not have as much access to refrigerated or fresh foods as others do. We also can't discriminate against people because they're in a lower income bracket. We've got to make sure people are able to get healthy, nutritious, wholesome foods. And so we have to take all these things into account. Supply chains are important. So I heard on the news the other day, 70% of the tomatoes in the United States come from Mexico. And the United States did pull out of the suspension agreement with Mexico. And that was basically an agreement. Mexico said, we're not going to flood the market with Mexican tomatoes and we'll work with the United States on that. What happens if 70% of our tomatoes are no longer available to us? It's not as if someone who's manufacturing food or a buyer for a major grocery store can anticipate in 2 months' time, I'm going to have a much smaller percentage of US grown tomatoes that I can get. Can I get tomatoes from other places? Can I get tomatoes from Chile? Can I get tomatoes from Colombia? Is it just Mexico that I'm worried about? We don't have enough greenhouses in the United States to have a year-round supply of these products. So Arizona, Florida, those places grow a lot of them. But I guess what I'm trying to say is we have to look at the economics of the places in which we want to encourage growth and we want these products to be an emerging area of economic growth and farming, but we can't do that overnight. And so we have to figure out what our grand plan is and then execute it over a period of time. Because consumers need choice, consumers need to keep the costs down, and we need supplies of food daily. It's not something that we can say, this year, no tomatoes, next year, no squash, the year after that, pumpkins, maybe not, you won't have them for Halloween. Consumers won't stand for that. And there will be pushback. So we need to figure out how to do this the right way, the smart way, and putting safety, health first, and basing those decisions on sound science, bringing it back to the science and the professionals who really do know what they're doing.
Yeah, wonderful. We've covered so much in a short period of time on this conversation. Adaptive strategies that industry, regardless of sector, are adopting risk management on the go, where in the past it was like risk management for the year and we'll ride it out. You have to do risk management daily. Third party risks, you just
Mhm.
can't rely on the third parties following through or whether or not those third parties are going to be in existence that you previously relied upon for your supply chain. And again, regardless of sector, we talked about adaptive strategy like onshoring, right? In
Mhm.
terms of how can we effectively onshore across these sectors. And one other interesting piece you added in here is people as part of the supply chain,
Mhm.
right? Workers and not just any type of workers, but competent professionals within the supply chain to enable the supply chain. I want to just throw out here for you, what are your predictions? I want to get a little bit more in your head about predictions for the future, all of these things considered, of FDA regulated products in global supply chains.
I forgot to bring my magic ball of looking into the future, but I think what we need to make sure is that we are not setting ourselves up for chaos. We need to think through these issues carefully and thoughtfully. We need to have a partnership with the administration, with states. We need to think through this economic development that we want to see in the United States in a way that makes sense. FDA regulated products, FDA was put in place because we want to make sure that pharmaceutical products, medical countermeasures, therapies, medical devices, food are regulated appropriately and that they're safe. First and foremost, FDA is a public health agency, and they want to protect the public health. They want to protect global public health because many of our products aren't just for the United States, they're global products. So I think what we need to make sure that we do is we're diversifying our supply chains so that we can maintain the levels of purchasing that we need to fulfill what our consumer bases want. I think we need to make sure that we have supplies of the important pharmaceuticals and medical therapeutic products that are needed by our population every day. And we know that we have an aging population in the United States that are even more reliant on medical products. So we want to make sure that we're not short selling anyone in pursuit of a potentially contrary goal. So, from my perspective, we need FDA to really focus in on what it's good at with respect to regulatory issues. I hope that FDA focuses on its practice and procedures. And the Food, Drug, and Cosmetic Act is a really important law. The Food Safety Modernization Act was an important update to it. FDA has a lot of tools, and I hope it uses them in an appropriate way to make sure that our supply chains are protected and they're doing what they can. I also know that, the foreign supplier verification program is a big part of the Food Safety Modernization Act. FDA also verifies foreign producers for pharmaceutical products, medical devices, things like that. We need to make sure that those inspections and that inspectorate is fully funded and it has the individuals that it needs. So, my predictions would be we don't want to descend into chaos on some of these issues just because we're not thinking through the immediate and potential impacts. So, I think we need to have really good conversations about those things. We need to have free and fair, open conversations that are not finger pointing, but just sober and on the facts and giving our decision makers the best information possible, the most frank reactions to potential policies to make sure that they have all the facts they need to make the right decisions. And ultimately, I have faith that we are going to make the right decisions. And Americans are very pragmatic. And I think our government, at the end of the day, is very attuned to what Americans are thinking and feeling, and we're pretty good about expressing ourselves. So I think there will be disruptions. I think we're going to continue to see disruptions in global supply chains due to any number of issues. But I think the best thing we can do is chart a pragmatic course, stay on a pragmatic course, and continue to update and learn lessons at each step of the way.
No, that's wonderful. That's a wonderful prediction. And it also encompassed, I usually like to end these conversations with collaboration, right? In the spirit of collaboration. So you articulated some very actionable steps that can be taken, and not just for the regulatory bodies, but industry stakeholders, as well as policymakers, right? So it can be strengthened, the supply chain, at least the education of supply chain can be strengthened. And then hopefully, right, hopefully we can get to a place of steady state in spite of all of the factors that lead to these disruptions. Amara, we're at our time. You've been so
Okay.
gracious. I really appreciate it. You've been an excellent guest of Baker Host, and we'd be thrilled if you will come back again in the future. I want to wish you well, and I want to wish all our listeners well, and also let folks know that we will continue this series. So stay tuned. And Mara, I'll give you a last word.
It's been my pleasure, and any opportunity I get to spend time with you, Winston, is my sincere pleasure. So thank you for inviting me, and thank you for taking the time to chat.
Wonderful. Stay well.
You too. Thanks.
Thank you, Winston and Mara. If you have any questions for Winston, his contact information is in the show notes. As always, thanks for listening to Baker Hosts. Comments heard on Baker Hosts are for informational purposes and should not be construed as legal advice regarding any specific facts or circumstances. Listeners should not act upon the information provided on Baker Hosts without first consulting with a lawyer directly. The opinions expressed on Baker Hosts are those of participants appearing on the program and do not necessarily reflect those of the firm. For more information about our practices and experience, please visit bakerlaw.com.